After making 3 orbits around the Earth and landing safely despite technical problems, Glen became a national hero. He helped restore American confidence in its ability to compete with the Soviet Union in the race into space. 2 years later, he resigned from NASA and announced plans to run for a U.S. Senate seat from Ohio. He served in that capacity for 24 years.
I guess I've looked at my whole life as being a sort of service to my country.
Former U.S. presidential candidate Hillary Clinton was among the first to make a public statement on the death of John Glen during an event on Capitol Hill.
Senator John Glen, a friend to many of us and a genuine American hero, passed away today.
As a senator from Ohio, Glen was involved in U.S. plans regarding the Bosnian War during the administration of President Bill Clinton.
We are prepared to use overwhelming force, not just matching force, but overwhelming force if we're fired upon. So I think maybe we can provide a great service here and with minimal risk. If we can do that, then it's certainly worth doing.
But in 1998, Glen returned to space after a 36-year absence. In a 9-day mission aboard the shuttle Discovery, scientists studied the effects of weightlessness on aging. Before the mission, he had this to say to his beloved wife.
One thing I promised Annie the day we were married, in addition to our wedding vows, of course, was that I would do everything I could to keep life from being boring.
Glen was a recipient of many honors, among them the Medal of Honor from President Barack Obama in 2012. Obama issued a statement Thursday saying Glen inspired generations of scientists, engineers, and astronauts who will take us to Mars and beyond. Slavica Ho, VOA News, Washington.
Amps is 2-6. All systems are go.
You could see whole nations at a glance. It was just a view like we had never had before, and I think my words at that time were a beautiful view, which it certainly was. I went across the Atlantic and into the dark side, and then when I was coming out on the light side of the Earth again, with the first rays of the sun coming through the Earth's atmosphere and to the spacecraft, as I glanced out the window, it looked like a summer evening out in the meadow someplace where there are a few fireflies, but there were millions of them, as far as I could see.
The whole shower of them coming by me now. They're bright yellow. They're all lit up.
What we determined later on was that they were moisture particles from the heat exchanger, where there's a little drip of water comes out that then diffused into much smaller particles all over.
Astronomers have been wrong.
You're one of the few people who has been portrayed during his lifetime in film. How do you think Ed Harris did?
You know, I've never met Ed Harris to this day. Now, people think we had something to do with that movie, The Right Stuff, and we didn't. Had no connection with him at all. When Hollywood got hold of that film, they sort of made it pretty fanciful.
Around the world, all is ready. The men, the stations, the space vehicle.
People ask fairly often, what's the most memorable event in your life? And they'll expect, space flight, of course, and that is a big one. But I don't think anything ever surpasses what you do in combat. Those are some vivid things that are impressed on your memory, and I'm sure every veteran that's been in combat would agree with that. There's nothing compares to that. During one of my checkout missions, when I was flying wing on the squadron CEO, we were down low, and he got hit by anti-aircraft fire and couldn't control the airplane, had to get out, and went down on the ground. And he was in sort of some scrub brush area, and I saw the parachute being pulled in after he went down, and this is way up a couple hundred miles up behind the lines. I calculated the amount of fuel I would need to get back to altitude again, enough to glide back over our own lines, because I really thought we were just within minutes of getting him out of there. But I was down low and kept circling, and the chopper never did get there in time, so when I hit my minimum fuel, enough to get me back to 40,000 feet, flamed out up there and glided back over our lines. Well, had a good tailwind at altitude that day, and so I got back over our base. And what had happened was his little dinghy had blown up and whoosh, make a big sizzling noise, and so the people and the soldier knew where to come. Anyway, they got him and marched him off, and later on he came out as a PW at the end of what was called Big Switch on the prisoner exchange at the end of that time period, and I was able to be up there. He berated me, and I said, "What are you yelling at me for?" Because all I was doing trying to get you out. He said, every time you'd come around up there, they would throw me in a ditch and sit on me or step on me, stand on me, and it really hurt my shoulder because he'd already been shot. He said all he wanted me to do was just go away and go home.
Now, Senator Glenn, let me ask you something. Is there anybody in Washington you would like to take up in space with you and just leave there?
Well, my main problem to come up, I had a few senators said if they once got me up here, they wouldn't provide the money to bring me back. So I'm glad we got by that anyway.
That was the reason I was up there, as a matter of fact, on that second flight. It wasn't just a final assignment. I had noted in some of the NASA material that there were some 52 changes in the human body that occur in space and over a period of time. On the Earth here, the human body changes as you get older. There are about 8 or 10 of those things, like the body's immune system. You get less resistant to disease and infection up there over a period of time. The same thing happens to the elderly right here on Earth. It might make it possible for the younger people to stay up in flight much longer without harmful effect, and might even give us some clues of how we take away frailties of old age right here on Earth. And then I volunteered for the flight and was told that I'd have to pass the same physical as everybody else, so and I was able to do that. So I felt very fortunate to be up there. But there were 4 days up there that I had 21 different parameters were being recorded, and blood samples each day that I was on that routine also.
I understand you had a nickname for Scott?
Don't remember what that was.
Well, he told me that you called him Count Dracula.
Oh, yeah, I did. Scott became Dracula to me as far as I was concerned, but we got the blood, and that was the objective.
Now, you grew up in a pretty small town in Ohio. You grew up in New Concord. Yeah. That's where you met Anna, your wife. Could you just talk about the experience of growing up in a small town in America and what that did for you?
I think that there couldn't be a better place to grow up. Children were much more free to do what they wanted to do and form our kids' groups and go camping and go swimming in the creek down below the town. Those were the depths of the Great Depression. People would come up to our home from old Route 40, the National Road, and knock on the front door and ask Mother if she could spare them something to eat. And Mother would always fix them a plate of food, and they'd sit on the back steps and eat it. And we planted a huge garden, and Mother canned a lot of stuff, and that became something that we shared with other people in town. I'm sure that those experiences in my early days there in New Concord really have affected my life.
If you don't mind my asking, how would you like to be remembered?
I'm not interested in sitting looking back.
Pretend that we can disappear.